When did pretending to be okay become too hard to hide? I can pinpoint the exact moment. Tuesday morning, 7:43 a.m., standing in the school bathroom mirror, watching my hands shake as I tried to cover the bruises on my neck with concealer. For 3 years, I'd been the master of fine. Teachers asked how things were at home. Fine. Friends noticed I was quieter lately. Just tired. Mom asked why I wouldn't eat dinner. Not hungry. Fine became my favorite lie, my security blanket, my shield against a world that couldn't handle the truth. The bruises started small, fingerprint marks on my upper arms that I could hide with long sleeves. Then came the split lip I blamed on walking into a door, the black eye I covered with bangs and makeup stolen from the school nurse's office. Dad's drinking had always been background noise in our house. Empty bottles clinking in the recycling bin, slurred words during dinner, the smell of whiskey on his breath when he kissed my forehead goodnight. But when I turned 16 and started looking more like Mom, the woman who'd left us when I was 8, something shifted. "You remind me of her," he'd slur, gripping my shoulders too tight. Same lying eyes, same ungrateful mouth. The first time he hit me, I was so shocked I convinced myself it was an accident. He'd been reaching for his beer, and I'd walked into his backhand. He cried afterward, begging forgiveness, swearing it would never happen again. I believed him because I had to. The second time, I made excuses. He was stressed about work. I shouldn't have talked back. I should have done the dishes like he asked. By the 10th time, I'd run out of excuses. I just had survival. My best friend Kieran had been asking questions for weeks. Why didn't I hang out anymore? Why did I flinch when people raised their voices? Why did I always wear turtlenecks, even in September heat? "You're scaring me," she said after I declined another sleepover invitation. "Talk to me." But how do you explain that your father sees your mother's face when he looks at you? How do you admit that the man who taught you to ride a bike now leaves handprint bruises on your throat? How do you say the words out loud when saying them makes it real? So I kept pretending, kept saying fine, kept painting concealer over purple fingerprints and telling myself this was normal teenage stuff. Everyone has family problems, right? That Tuesday morning changed everything. I'd been in the bathroom for 20 minutes, layering foundation over the newest marks, a perfect handprint around my neck from where he'd slammed me against the kitchen wall the night before. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The concealer kept smearing. "This is insane," I whispered to my reflection. "This isn't fine." The bathroom door opened. Kieran walked in, took one look at my tear-streaked face and the makeup covering my neck, and her expression shifted to horror. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Tessalyn, what happened to you?" For 3 years, I'd been building walls, constructing elaborate lies, perfecting the art of fine. In that moment, staring at my best friend's horrified face, every wall I'd built came crashing down. "It's not fine," I whispered, my voice breaking. "None of it is fine." Kieran stepped closer, her eyes scanning the bruises I'd been trying to hide. "Who did this to you?" The question hung in the air, 3 simple words that would change everything. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, the bathroom door slammed open again. Principal Hawthorne stood in the doorway, her face a mask of concern and authority. Behind her was Ms. Rodriguez, the guidance counselor, and Officer Brennan, the school resource officer. "Tessalyn," Principal Hawthorne said gently, "we need to talk." My blood turned to ice. Someone had reported something. Someone had seen through my carefully constructed facade. Kieran grabbed my hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to lie anymore." But I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared for this moment. For 3 years, I'd been in control of my story, controlling what people saw, what they knew. Now that control was slipping through my fingers like water. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the lie rolling off my tongue with practiced ease. "Everything's fine." Principal Hawthorne's expression softened. "Tessalyn, we know it's not fine. Mrs. Patterson called this morning." Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor who'd seen Dad drag me out of the car by my hair 2 nights ago, who'd watched through her kitchen window as he shoved me up our front steps, screaming about how I was just like my mother, a lying, worthless piece of trash. I should have known she'd seen. Mrs. Patterson saw everything from behind her lace curtains. She'd been watching our house for years, probably collecting evidence of Dad's deteriorating behavior like stamps in an album. Part of me wondered why she'd waited so long to call. Maybe she'd been building her own case, waiting for something undeniable. "She's confused," I said quickly. "She's old. She probably saw something on TV and thought, she has photos," Officer Brennan said quietly. "And video." The world tilted sideways. Photos, video. Evidence of what I'd spent 3 years trying to hide. I thought about Mrs. Patterson's house with its perfect view of our driveway, our front door, our kitchen window. How many times had she watched Dad's explosions of rage? How many times had she seen me stumble into the house, supporting myself against the doorframe because I was dizzy from being shaken too hard? Kieran squeezed my hand tighter. "Tell them," she whispered. "Please, tell them the truth." I looked at the adults surrounding me, people who were paid to protect students, who were trained to handle situations like this, people who would have to call Child Protective Services, people who would have to involve the police, people who would tear apart what was left of my family. "I can't," I choked out. "You don't understand. He's not always like this. When he's sober, he's a man who hurts children," Ms. Rodriguez finished gently. "Tessalyn, this isn't your fault. Nothing you did caused this." But that's where she was wrong. I knew exactly what caused it. I looked like Mom. I sounded like Mom. I had Mom's stubborn streak, her way of talking back, her refusal to just shut up and take it. Mom had been smart enough to leave. I wasn't. I remembered the night she left. I was 8, hiding at the top of the stairs, watching through the banister spindles as she threw clothes into a suitcase while Dad paced behind her, alternating between begging and threatening. "Don't do this, Catherine," he'd pleaded. "Think about Tessalyn. She needs her mother. She needs a mother who's alive." Mom had shot back, her voice shaking. "And if I stay here, you're going to kill me eventually. I would never—" "You put your hands around my throat last week, David. You squeezed until I saw stars." What happens next time? What happens when you're drunker, angrier, when you finally cross that line you can't uncross? Dad had collapsed into his chair, sobbing. I'll change. I'll get help. I'll stop drinking. You've said that before. Mom's voice was hollow, defeated, dozens of times. The only thing that changes is how creative you get with your excuses. She'd looked up then and seen me watching. Our eyes met across the space between the stairs and the living room, and I saw something break in her face. Tessalyn, she'd whispered. I'd run down the stairs and thrown myself into her arms. She smelled like lavender and tears, and I could feel her whole body shaking as she held me. I have to go, baby, she'd said. But I'll come back for you. When it's safe, when I can protect you, I'll come back. When? I'd asked. Soon, she'd promised. That was 8 years ago. I stopped waiting for soon when I turned 14. The next few hours passed in a blur of questions, forms, and phone calls. They moved me to the nurse's office where a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands documented every bruise, every mark, every scar. She photographed the handprint around my neck, the finger-shaped bruises on my arms, the healing split on my lip. This mark here, she said, pointing to a faded scar above my left eyebrow. How old is this? 2 years, I said. He threw a glass. A piece hit me. And this one? She touched a thin white line on my wrist. I fell down the stairs. He pushed me during an argument about my report card. Each mark told a story. Each scar was a memory I tried to forget. By the time she finished, my body looked like a roadmap of violence, and I felt more exposed than I ever had in my life. How long has this been happening? She asked. 3 years, I whispered. Since I turned 16, since I started looking like her. Who's her? My mother. She left when I was 8. Dad says she was a liar and a cheat. Says I'm just like her. The nurse wrote everything down, her pen scratching across the paper like a judgment being rendered. I thought about the progression, how it had escalated so gradually that I'd almost been able to convince myself it was normal. It started with harsh words, then grabbing, then shoving. The first real hit had been almost anticlimactic after months of building tension. By the time the slaps became punches, the punches became choking. The choking became full-blown beatings. I was so deep in the pattern that escape felt impossible. Each incident was followed by apologies, promises, brief periods of kindness that made me hope things would get better. They never did. By lunchtime, a CPS worker had arrived. Barbara Chen was a small woman with tired eyes and a briefcase full of paperwork. She explained the process: emergency removal, temporary placement, court hearings, investigations. Where will I go? I asked. We have a foster family that specializes in emergency placements. They're good people. They understand what you've been through. Foster care. The words felt foreign and terrifying. I'd spent 3 years protecting my father's secret, and now strangers would be making decisions about my life. What about school? What about my job? I worked at a local coffee shop 20 hours a week, saving for college, maintaining some semblance of normal teenage life. We'll figure it out, Barbara said. Right now, we need to focus on keeping you safe. Safe. Another word that felt foreign. Barbara explained what would happen next. Dad would be arrested when he got home from work. I'd be taken to the foster home immediately. There would be interviews, evaluations, court dates. My life as I knew it was over. Can I say goodbye to anyone? I asked. Your friend Kieran is waiting outside, Barbara said. You have a few minutes. Kieran was sitting in the hallway, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she jumped up and wrapped me in the kind of hug I hadn't received from family in years. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I didn't do something sooner. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how bad. It's not your fault, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I got really good at hiding it. Where are they taking you? Foster care. Somewhere across town. Will you be able to come back to school? I don't know. Maybe. We stood there holding each other, and I realized this might be goodbye to more than just Kieran. This was goodbye to my old life, my old identity, my old way of surviving. Everything familiar was about to disappear. Promise me you'll be okay, Kieran said. I don't know how to be okay, I admitted. I've been pretending for so long, I don't remember what real feels like. Then don't worry about being okay, she said. Just worry about being honest. The okay part will come later. At 2:30 p.m., Officer Brennan drove me home to collect my thing. My hands shook as we pulled into the driveway. Dad's truck was gone. He was probably at work, unaware that his secret was out, that the life he'd constructed was crumbling. You have 15 minutes, Officer Brennan said. Take what you need. I walked through the house like a ghost, seeing it with new eyes. The hole in the living room wall where Dad had thrown a bottle. The kitchen table with one leg slightly shorter than the others, broken during one of his rages and never properly fixed. The family photos where I stood stiff and uncomfortable, my smile never quite reaching my eyes. I noticed things I'd trained myself not to see. The way the floorboards creaked near the stairs, where I'd learned to step lightly to avoid waking him. The chip in the kitchen counter where my head had hit during one particularly violent episode. The blood stain on the hallway carpet that we'd never been able to completely clean. This house held 8 years of memories, some good, most terrible. Before Mom left, there had been birthday parties in the backyard, Christmas mornings full of laughter, bedtime stories read in silly voices. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. Some other family that had lived here before violence moved in and took over. In my bedroom, I packed quickly. Clothes, toiletries, my journal, the few photos I had of Mom, my laptop, and the small stuffed elephant she'd given me before she left. Everything that mattered fit in 2 garbage bags and a backpack. As I was finishing, I heard Dad's truck pull into the driveway. My blood froze. Officer Brennan was outside talking to Barbara. I was alone in the house with the man who'd spent 3 years using me as his personal punching bag. His footsteps echoed through the house, heavy and familiar. Tessalyn, he called. What's with the cop car in the driveway? I grabbed my bags and headed for the door, but he appeared in the hallway, blocking my path. He looked at the bags in my hands, then at my face, and his expression shifted from confusion to rage. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Like hell you are." He stepped closer, and I instinctively backed against the wall. "You think you can just leave? After everything I've done for you? After I raised you by myself when your worthless mother abandoned us?" "You didn't raise me," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "You tortured me. For 3 years you used me as a replacement for the woman you couldn't control." His face went red. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Finally admit that you're a drunk and an abuser? That you hit children?" The words felt powerful coming out of my mouth. For 3 years, I'd swallowed truth like poison, let it burn my throat and corrode my insides. Speaking it aloud was like vomiting up something toxic that had been making me sick. He raised his hand and I flinched instinctively, but the blow never came. Officer Brennan filled the doorway, his hand resting on his service weapon. "Mr. Holloway," he said calmly, "step away from your daughter." Dad turned, his fist still raised. "This is my house. My daughter. You have no right." "Actually, I do." Officer Brennan held up a piece of paper. "Emergency protective order. You're not allowed within 500 feet of Tessalin until the hearing." "This is bullshit," Dad snarled. "She's lying. She's a manipulative little bitch just like her mother. You can't believe—" "Sir, I need you to leave the residence immediately." "Leave? This is my house." "Not anymore. You have 10 minutes to pack a bag and find somewhere else to stay." I watched my father, this man who'd terrorized me for years, crumble. His shoulders sagged, his hands shook. For the first time in years, he looked small and powerless. The transformation was startling. Without the context of fear, without the dynamic of power and control, he just looked like what he was. A broken, alcoholic man who destroyed everything good in his life. "Tessalin," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, I'm sorry. I never meant—" "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You meant every hit, every bruise, every time you told me I was worthless. You meant all of it. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were drunk when you chose to drink," I said. "You were sober when you chose not to get help. You made choices and I paid the price for them." Officer Brennan escorted me outside while Dad packed his bag. I sat in the back of the patrol car, watching my childhood home through the window, knowing I'd never see it again. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I dreamed of leaving this house, of escaping the nightmare it contained. But now that it was happening, I felt strangely empty. This house was my prison, but it was also the only home I'd ever known. The Foster family lived across town in a modest 2-story house with a flower garden and a porch swing. Frank and Delilah Morrison were in their 50s, empty nesters who'd been fostering teenagers for over a decade. They welcomed me with quiet kindness and showed me to a small but comfortable room with lavender walls and white furniture. "This is yours for as long as you need it," Delilah said. "We know this is scary. We know you've been through hell, but you're safe now." Safe, that word again. The room was everything my bedroom at home wasn't. Peaceful, clean, free of bad memories. There was a desk by the window, a bookshelf filled with young adult novels, and a bulletin board where I could pin photos and mementos. It felt like stepping into someone else's life. "We have a few house rules," Frank explained as we sat in their living room. "Nothing too complicated. We eat dinner together when possible. We ask before having friends over. We respect each other's space and belongings. And we communicate when there are problems instead of letting them fester." Communication. Another foreign concept. What if I don't know how to do that? I asked. Communicate, I mean. In my house, talking about problems usually made them worse. Delilah's expression softened. "Then we'll teach you. We'll all learn together." That first night, I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway, waiting for the doorknob to turn, waiting for the pain. It never came. Instead, I heard gentle sounds. The television murmuring downstairs, Frank and Delilah talking quietly, the house settling into evening silence. Normal sounds, safe sounds. I cried myself to sleep that night, but for the first time in years, they were tears of relief instead of fear. The next few weeks passed in a haze of legal proceedings, therapy appointments, and adjusting to life without fear. I learned what it felt like to come home without checking if Dad's truck was in the driveway. I discovered what dinner conversations sounded like without the threat of violence hanging over every word. Dr. Patricia Summers, my court-appointed therapist, helped me understand the difference between normal family conflict and abuse. She explained trauma responses, hypervigilance, and why I flinched at sudden movements even in safe environments. "Your nervous system has been in survival mode for 3 years," she explained during our third session. "It's going to take time to convince your brain that you're actually safe now." "How long?" I asked. "Everyone heals differently, but the fact that you're asking means you're already starting." Therapy was harder than I'd expected. Dr. Summers asked questions that forced me to examine memories I'd buried, to feel feelings I'd numbed, to acknowledge truths I'd denied. Some sessions left me exhausted. Others left me angry. All of them left me a little more honest with myself. "Tell me about before the abuse started," she said one afternoon. "What was your relationship with your father like when you were younger?" I thought back to my earliest memories. He was different. Not perfect, but different. He taught me to ride a bike, helped with homework, took me to the park. He drank then too, but it was manageable. What changed? Mom left, and I started getting older, looking more like her. But you understand that you looking like your mother isn't what caused the abuse, right? The abuse was always a possibility. Your appearance might have been a trigger, but it wasn't the cause. I struggled with this concept. For years, I'd convinced myself that if I just looked different, acted different, been different, maybe Dad wouldn't have hurt me. Accepting that it wasn't my fault meant accepting that I'd had no control over the situation, which was somehow more terrifying than believing I'd caused it. Kieran visited every day after school, helping me catch up on assignments, bringing gossip from school, treating me like I was still the same person despite everything that had changed. How's everyone reacting? I asked one afternoon as we sat on the Morrisons' porch swing. She hesitated. Some people are being weird about it. Asking invasive questions, treating you like a charity case, but mostly people are just glad you're safe. Do they know everything? Just that you're in foster care temporarily due to family issues. Principal Hawthorne hasn't given details, and neither have I. I was grateful for the privacy, but I also knew rumors were probably spreading. In a school of 800 students, secrets didn't stay secret long. Mrs. Patterson gave an interview to the local news. Kieran added reluctantly. My stomach dropped. What did she say? That she'd been concerned about your family for years. That she finally felt she had to act when she witnessed something particularly disturbing. She didn't give specifics, but now everyone knows. I finished. Is that bad? I considered the question. Part of me was mortified that my private shame was becoming public knowledge, but another part of me felt relieved. For 3 years, I'd carried the secret alone. Now, the weight was distributed among lawyers, social workers, teachers, and neighbors. It was no longer mine to bear by myself. No, I said finally. I think it's good. Secrets gave the abuse power. Maybe truth will take some of that power away. School became more complicated after the news broke. Some classmates treated me with awkward sympathy, like I might break if they spoke too loudly. Others avoided me entirely, as if domestic violence was contagious. A few asked probing questions about what it was like, what my dad had done, whether I'd fought back. I learned to deflect most of it, but one conversation stuck with me. Raven Blackwood, a quiet girl from my English class, approached me at my locker one day. My stepdad hits my mom, she said without preamble. Has for 2 years. She keeps saying she'll leave, but she never does. I stopped organizing my books and looked at her. Have you told anyone? Who would I tell? It's not me he's hitting. It's still abuse. Witnessing violence is traumatic too. She looked surprised, like this hadn't occurred to her. What should I do? She asked. I thought about all the people who might have helped me if I'd asked, all the opportunities I'd missed because I was too ashamed to speak up. Tell someone, I said. A teacher, a counselor, a trusted adult. Your mom might not be ready to leave, but that doesn't mean you have to suffer in silence. A week later, I learned that Raven had talked to Ms. Rodriguez. Her mother was connected with domestic violence resources, and while she hadn't left her husband yet, she was making safety plans and considering her options. It was the first time I realized that my story might help someone else's. The court hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October. I'd been living with the Morrisons for 6 weeks, and life had settled into a rhythm I'd never experienced before. Predictable, peaceful, safe. Barbara Chen prepared me for what to expect. Dad's lawyer would try to paint me as a troubled teenager making false accusations. They'd bring up my mother's abandonment, suggest I was acting out due to abandonment issues. They'd point to his steady employment, his lack of a criminal record, his apparent sobriety since my removal. His lawyer is going to try to make you doubt yourself, Barbara warned. He's going to suggest that you're exaggerating, that you're angry at your father for normal parental discipline, that you're lying for attention. What if he's right? I asked. What if I am exaggerating? Barbara pulled out a folder filled with photographs. This is what exaggeration looks like? The images were brutal. Purple fingerprints around my throat, bruises in various stages of healing covering my arms and torso, the cut above my eyebrow that had required 5 stitches. Looking at them objectively, removed from the context of my daily life, I could see how severe the abuse had been. Abusers are very good at making their victims question reality, Barbara said. That's part of how they maintain control. But you can't fake medical evidence. You can't fake documentation of repeated injuries over multiple years. Are you ready for this? Barbara asked the night before. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm tired of hiding. The Morrisons offered to attend the hearing for moral support, and I accepted gratefully. I'd never had a cheering section before, people who showed up just because they cared about my well-being. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everything look pale and sterile. Dad sat at a table with his lawyer, wearing a suit I'd never seen before. He looked older somehow, diminished. The confidence that had made him so terrifying at home was gone, replaced by nervous energy and defeated posture. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. The bailiff swore me in, and I promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. For 45 minutes, I told my story. Every detail, every bruise, every moment of terror, every lie I'd told to protect him. I described the progression from emotional abuse to physical violence, the way he justified his actions, the fear that had become my constant companion. The prosecutor was gentle but thorough, walking me through specific incidents with dates and details. She asked about the impact on my school performance, my social relationships, my mental health. She had me identify photographs of my injuries and explain how each one had occurred. In your own words, she said, how would you describe your relationship with your father? I thought about the question carefully. For months, I'd been untangling the complexity of loving someone who hurt me, of missing someone who terrorized me, of grieving the father I'd lost to alcohol and violence. My father was 2 different people, I said finally. There was the dad who taught me to ride a bike and helped with homework. And there was the man who used me as a punching bag when he was drunk and angry. I loved the first person and was terrified of the second. But somewhere along the way, the second person took over completely, and the first person disappeared. Dad's lawyer tried to rattle me during cross-examination. He was a stern man with silver hair and a condescending tone that reminded me uncomfortably of my father during his worst moments. Isn't it true that you've always been a difficult child? He asked. I've always been his child, I replied. I don't know if that makes me difficult. Isn't it true that you frequently disobeyed your father's rules? Which rules? The rule about not talking back when he called me worthless? The rule about not crying when he hit me? Which rules are we talking about? Objection, Barbara's lawyer said. Argumentative. The judge sustained the objection, but I'd made my point. Isn't it true that you resent your father for your mother's abandonment? I resent my father for hitting me, I said calmly. My mother's choices are separate from that. But you admit you have anger toward your father? Yes, I'm angry that he chose alcohol over his daughter. I'm angry that he hurt me instead of getting help. I'm angry that he made me afraid in my own home. Those seem like reasonable things to be angry about. The lawyer spent 20 minutes trying to trip me up, to get me to contradict myself or admit to exaggerating. But the truth was simple and consistent. Dad had hurt me repeatedly for 3 years. No amount of legal maneuvering could change that fact. When Dad took the stand in his own defense, I watched this man who'd controlled my life for so long reduced to stammering excuses and weak justifications. He admitted to drinking too much, to losing his temper, to disciplining me more harshly than he should have. But he couldn't quite admit to abuse. I never meant to hurt her, he said, his voice shaking. I was dealing with a lot of stress, work pressure, financial difficulties, raising a teenage daughter alone. Sometimes I lost my temper, but I never intended to cause serious harm. Mr. Holloway, the prosecutor said, holding up a photograph of my bruised neck. Can you explain how accidentally losing your temper results in handprint bruises around a child's throat? Dad stared at the photo for a long moment. I don't remember that incident specifically. You don't remember choking your daughter? I may have grabbed her shoulders during an argument. I didn't realize. The medical examiner testified that these injuries are consistent with sustained pressure around the neck for approximately 30 seconds. Are you telling this court that you held your daughter by the throat for half a minute without realizing it? Dad's composure cracked. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly. If I hurt her that badly, I'm sorry, but it wasn't intentional. How many times would you estimate you hurt Tessalyn unintentionally? I don't know. A few times, maybe. The prosecutor presented a timeline spanning 3 years, documenting dozens of incidents with medical records, school photos showing injuries, and witness statements from teachers who'd noticed signs of abuse. Does this refresh your memory about the frequency of these unintentional injuries? Dad looked overwhelmed by the evidence. I didn't realize it was so often. I thought I was doing my best. Raising a child alone is difficult. Mr. Holloway, do you believe that choking a child, giving them black eyes and breaking their ribs constitutes doing your best? No, he whispered. No, it doesn't. After both sides presented their cases, the judge called a recess. I sat in the hallway with the Morrisons and Barbara, my hands shaking as I waited for the decision that would determine my future. Frank bought me a sandwich from the courthouse cafeteria, but I couldn't eat. Delilah rubbed my shoulders and reminded me that whatever happened, I had a safe place to live. Barbara reviewed the evidence one more time, expressing confidence that the judge would rule in my favor. What if she doesn't? I asked. What if she decides I should go back? That won't happen, Barbara said firmly. The evidence is overwhelming. Your father's own testimony was essentially a confession, but I'd learned not to trust in good outcomes. Hope felt dangerous, like setting myself up for disappointment. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge looked directly at me before speaking. Miss Holloway, she said, I want you to know that what you've endured took tremendous courage to share. The evidence presented, the photographs, the medical records, the witness testimony, paints a clear picture of systematic abuse. She turned to Dad. Mr. Holloway, your parental rights are hereby terminated. You are ordered to continue alcohol treatment and anger management counseling. The protective order will remain in effect indefinitely. Dad's shoulders shook. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but he shrugged it off. Relief flooded through me so suddenly that I felt dizzy. It was over. Actually, legally, finally over. Tessalyn, Dad called out as I stood to leave. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I stopped and turned back to him. 3 months ago, those words might have meant something. 3 months ago, I might have been willing to forgive him, to give him another chance, to go back to pretending everything was fine. I know you are, I said quietly. But sorry doesn't undo 3 years of bruises. Sorry doesn't erase the fear. Sorry doesn't make what you did okay. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I hope you get better, I continued. I hope you get sober. I hope you learn to live with what you did. But I'm done pretending that your apologies are enough. I walked out of that courtroom a free person for the first time in 3 years. The Morrisons offered to let me stay through high school graduation, and I accepted gratefully. Life settled into a new normal, one built on honesty instead of lies, safety instead of fear, truth instead of pretense. I joined the drama club and discovered I had a talent for acting. Ironic, considering I'd been performing the role of Fine for so long. The first play I auditioned for was The Glass Menagerie, and I landed the role of Laura, a fragile young woman trapped by circumstances beyond her control. The parallels to my own life weren't lost on me, but playing Laura helped me understand the difference between being trapped and choosing to heal. I got a new job at a bookstore where my coworkers became friends instead of people I had to lie to. The manager, an older woman named Iris, had survived her own abusive marriage decades earlier. She didn't pry into my background, but she made it clear that she understood and supported me. Recovery isn't linear, she told me one afternoon as we shelved returns. Some days you'll feel strong and empowered. Other days you'll feel broken and afraid. Both are normal parts of healing. I started therapy and learned healthy ways to process anger and fear. Dr. Summers introduced me to concepts like boundaries, self-advocacy, and emotional regulation. She helped me understand that my hypervigilance and trust issues weren't character flaws, but normal responses to trauma. You developed these coping mechanisms to survive an impossible situation, she explained. They served you well when you needed them. Now we need to help you develop new tools for your new reality. One of the hardest things to unlearn was the habit of making myself small and invisible. For 3 years, I'd perfected the art of not attracting attention, not taking up space, not expressing needs or wants. In foster care, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being, I had to learn how to exist normally. What do you want for dinner? Delilah would ask, and I'd freeze. For years, wanting things had been dangerous. Expressing preferences had led to conflict. I'd trained myself not to have opinions. I don't know, I'd say automatically. That's okay, Delilah would respond patiently. Think about it. What sounds good to you? Slowly, I learned to trust that having preferences was safe, that expressing needs wouldn't result in punishment. that taking up space was allowed. Kieran and I remained best friends, but our relationship deepened. She'd seen me at my worst and stayed. She'd witnessed my breakdown and helped me rebuild. She'd proven that some people can be trusted with the truth. "Do you ever think about your mom?" she asked one evening as we worked on homework together. I'd been wondering the same thing. Every day. I wonder where she is, whether she's safe, whether she thinks about me. "Have you tried to find her?" Barbara looked into it. There's no current address, no employment records under her maiden name or married name. She either changed her identity or... I didn't finish the sentence, but Kieran understood. "Or she was dead." "Maybe she'll find you," Kieran said. "Maybe she's been looking too." I wanted to believe that, but I'd learned to temper hope with realism. If Mom had wanted to find me, she'd had 8 years to do it. Her absence felt like another form of abandonment, another relationship lost to Dad's violence. 6 months after the hearing, I received an unexpected visitor. I was working at the bookstore when a woman walked in, browsing the fiction section with an intensity that seemed forced. She was tall and thin, with graying brown hair and nervous energy that reminded me of something familiar. When she approached the counter to pay for her book, our eyes met, and I felt the world tilt. "Tessalyn," she whispered. "Mom." She looked older, more fragile than I remembered. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 8 years ago, and her hands shook as she placed money on the counter. "I saw your name in the newspaper," she said quietly. "The court case. I've been trying to work up the courage to approach you for weeks." I stared at her, feeling 8 years old again and 16 years old and every age in between. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Oregon. I changed my name, started over. I wanted to come back for you, but he threatened to kill us both if I ever contacted you. I was terrified that involving myself would make things worse for you. Things were already bad," I said, surprised by the anger in my voice. "They couldn't have gotten much worse." She flinched. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Tessalyn. I thought about you every single day. I saved money to hire a lawyer to fight for custody, but he convinced me that you were better off without me." "He convinced you? Or you convinced yourself?" The question hung between us. I could see her struggling with it, weighing honesty against self-preservation. "Both," she admitted finally. "I was terrified of him, but I was also terrified of being a mother, of failing you the way I felt I'd already failed. Leaving felt like the only choice, but staying away, that was cowardice." I studied her face, looking for the mother I remembered, trying to reconcile my childhood need for her with my adult understanding of her choices. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. "I'm not happy about it, but I understand it. You were a victim too." She started crying then, quiet tears that spoke of years of guilt and regret. "I have so many questions," I said. "I have time," she replied. "All the time you need." We talked for hours after my shift ended. She told me about her life in Oregon, the job she'd built, the therapy she'd received, the way she'd learned to live with the guilt of leaving me behind. I told her about the abuse, the foster care, the slow process of healing. "I want to be part of your life again," she said as the evening wound down. "If you'll let me. Not as the mother who should have protected you, but as the woman who loves you and wants to do better." "I'd like that," I said, "but slowly. I need time to figure out how to trust you again, however long it takes," she promised. On graduation day, I stood on the stage accepting my diploma, looking out at a crowd that included the Morrisons, Kieran and her family, Barbara Chen, several teachers who'd supported me through the hardest months of my life, and Mom, sitting in the back row with tears streaming down her face. Dad wasn't there. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd completed alcohol treatment and was working at a factory in another state. Part of me hoped he was getting better. Part of me would always carry the fear he'd instilled. But mostly, I felt free. After the ceremony, Kieran and I sat on the hood of her car in the school parking lot, watching families take photos and celebrate. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The pretending?" I considered the question. There had been a strange comfort in the lies, a sense of control that came from managing what people knew about my life, but it had also been exhausting, isolating, slowly poisonous. "No," I said finally. Pretending to be okay was like holding my breath for 3 years. I was slowly suffocating. I didn't realize how much oxygen I was missing until I finally exhaled. "When did you know you couldn't keep pretending?" I thought back to that Tuesday morning in the bathroom, hands shaking as I tried to cover bruises with makeup. Kieran's horrified face reflected in the mirror beside mine. "When someone I loved looked at me and saw through all my lies," I said. "When I realized that being seen, really seen, wasn't the terrifying thing I'd thought it would be. It was the only thing that could save me." We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the school, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Tomorrow, I'd start my summer job before heading to college in the fall. I'd study social work, planning to help other kids who were trapped in their own versions of fine. But tonight, I just wanted to sit with the truth. The messy, complicated, beautiful truth of a life no longer built on lies. For the first time in years, when someone asked how I was doing, I could answer honestly, I was okay. Not pretending to be okay. Not hiding behind fine. Actually genuinely, healingly okay. And that made all the difference. 3 years later, I graduated college with a degree in social work and a job offer at the same agency where Barbara Chen worked. On my first day, she pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You took your worst experience and turned it into your greatest strength." I thought about that as I sat across from my first client, a 15-year-old girl with bruises she claimed came from falling downstairs, anxiety she dismissed as normal teenage stress, and a father who called 17 times during our hour-long session. "How are things at home?" I asked gently. "Fine," she said automatically, her eyes not meeting mine. I recognized that word, that tone, that carefully constructed wall. I'd built the same wall once, painted it with the same lies, defended it with the same desperation. "That's interesting," I said quietly. "I used to say everything was fine, too, even when it wasn't, even when fine was the biggest lie I'd ever told." Her eyes snapped to mine. For just a moment, I saw a crack in her wall. "What happened when you stopped saying everything was fine?" she asked. I smiled. I learned the difference between surviving and living. I learned that the truth, even when it's scary, is always better than the prettiest lie. I learned that pretending to be okay was keeping me from actually being okay. She was quiet for a long moment. Is it hard? She whispered. Telling the truth? It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, I said honestly. And the most important. Because you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. You can't fix what you won't admit is broken. And you can't be truly okay while you're pretending to be fine. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. So, I said gently, let me ask you again, how are things at home? This time, when she opened her mouth, the truth came out. And in that moment, watching another person take their first brave step away from the prison of fine, I knew exactly why I'd survived my own darkness. Not just to escape it, but to light the way for others still trapped inside. The truth had set me free. Now it was my job to help others find their own freedom, one honest answer at a time. Over the next 2 years, I worked with dozens of children and teenagers caught in similar cycles of abuse and secrecy. Each case taught me something new about resilience, about the different ways trauma manifests, about the incredible strength it takes to break cycles of violence. Some clients were ready to leave immediately, desperate for any escape from their situations. Others needed months of relationship building before they felt safe enough to admit the truth. A few weren't ready to leave at all. And I learned the heartbreaking lesson that you can't save someone who isn't ready to be saved. But the ones who were ready, who found their courage and chose honesty over self-protection, those cases reminded me why I'd chosen this work. There was Marcus, a 12-year-old boy whose stepfather beat him with extension cords for minor infractions. He'd been covering his injuries with long sleeves and elaborate stories for 2 years before a gym teacher noticed the marks during a locker room check. There was Elia, a 16-year-old girl whose mother's boyfriend had been sexually abusing her since she was 13. She'd tried to tell her mother twice, but each time her mother chose the boyfriend over her daughter's safety. There was David, a 14-year-old whose grandmother beat him with wooden spoons and kitchen utensils, justifying it as traditional discipline. He'd been taught that honor and family loyalty required him to endure the abuse silently. Each child carried their own version of fine, their own elaborate system of lies and excuses designed to protect their abusers and preserve their families. And each one had to find their own path to truth. Not all of them made it. Some returned to their abusive situations despite interventions. Some aged out of the system without ever fully healing. Some carried their trauma into adulthood, perpetuating cycles they'd never learned to break. But enough of them found freedom to make the work worthwhile. On my 5th anniversary as a social worker, Barbara threw me a small celebration in the office break room. As I looked around at my colleagues, people who'd dedicated their careers to protecting children, to breaking cycles of abuse, to creating safety where none had existed, I felt overwhelming gratitude. Speech, someone called out. I wasn't much for public speaking, but I stood up anyway. 5 years ago, I was sitting where our clients sit now, I said. Scared, ashamed, convinced that my situation was normal, that I deserved what was happening to me. I thought asking for help was betrayal, that loyalty meant enduring suffering, that love and violence could coexist. I looked around the room at faces I'd come to trust and respect. Someone in this room, Barbara, saw through my lies and refused to let me disappear back into that dangerous situation. Someone in this room saved my life, not because it was easy or convenient, but because it was right. I paused, thinking about all the children we'd helped over the years. We don't always see the long-term impact of our work. We don't always know if the children we help will go on to break cycles or perpetuate them. But we show up anyway, because somewhere there's a kid who thinks they're alone, who thinks their situation is normal, who thinks asking for help is impossible. And sometimes, I finished, being seen by just one person who refuses to accept fine as an answer is enough to change everything. The applause was warm and genuine, but what moved me most was seeing some of my colleagues wipe away tears. We all carried pieces of the stories we'd heard, the children we'd helped, the ones we'd lost. After work that day, I drove to the cemetery where I'd left flowers on Mom's grave. She died 2 years earlier from cancer, and while our relationship had never fully healed, we'd found peace with each other before the end. I wish you could see what I'm doing now, I said to her headstone. I think you'd be proud. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I felt her presence, her approval, her love. I'd spent years angry at her for leaving, for choosing her own safety over mine. But working with abuse survivors had taught me compassion for the impossible choices people make when they're terrified and powerless. Mom had been a victim too. She'd done the best she could with the resources she had. And while her best hadn't been enough to protect me in the moment, her example had eventually taught me that leaving an abusive situation was possible. 10 years after my own escape, I was invited to speak at a conference for social workers and educators about recognizing signs of domestic abuse in children. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of professionals dedicated to child protection, I felt the full weight of how far I'd come. Abused children are expert liars, I began. Not because they're dishonest by nature, but because lying becomes a survival skill. They learn to read adult emotions and respond accordingly. They become masters of fine because fine keeps them safe in the short term. I clicked to my first slide. A photo of myself at 16, taken for school yearbook. To most observers, I looked like a normal teenager. Clean clothes, genuine smile, no visible injuries. This photo was taken 3 weeks after my father gave me a concussion, I said. I'd become so skilled at concealing abuse that even trained professionals missed the signs for years. I spent the next hour sharing specific indicators of abuse, ways to create safe spaces for disclosure, and strategies for supporting children through the legal process. But mostly, I talked about the importance of believing children when they finally find the courage to tell the truth. The hardest part of abuse isn't the physical pain, I explained. It's the isolation, the belief that no one will believe you, that no one can help you, that this is somehow normal or deserved. When a child finally breaks their silence, They're taking an enormous risk. How we respond in that moment determines whether they retreat back into secrecy or move forward toward healing. After my presentation, a teacher approached me during the break. "I have a student," she said quietly. "I'm almost certain she's being abused, but she denies it every time I ask. What should I do?" "Keep asking," I said. "Not aggressively, but consistently. Let her know you're safe, that you're available, that you won't judge her. Plant seeds of possibility. If you were in trouble, you could tell me. If someone was hurting you, it wouldn't be your fault. Sometimes it takes months for children to feel safe enough to disclose. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm seeing abuse where none exists? Then you've shown a child that adults are paying attention, that they matter, that someone cares about their well-being. That's not a bad thing to be wrong about." 6 months later, that same teacher emailed me. Her student had finally disclosed sexual abuse by her uncle. The girl was removed from the dangerous situation and placed with relatives who could protect her. She said she'd been wanting to tell someone for 2 years, the teacher wrote, but she was waiting for someone she could trust. "Thank you for encouraging me to keep trying." These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. Knowing that my story had helped someone else recognize and respond to abuse, that my experience had prevented another child from suffering in silence. As I write this, 15 years have passed since that Tuesday morning, when I finally stopped pretending to be okay. I'm 31 now, married to a kind man who understands trauma and respects boundaries, mother to a daughter I'm determined to raise with honesty and emotional safety. My daughter will never have to wonder if asking for help is betrayal. She'll never have to choose between family loyalty and personal safety. She'll grow up knowing that love and violence are incompatible, that adults are responsible for creating safety, that her worth isn't contingent on her ability to manage other people's emotions. Sometimes I think about the girl I was at 16, terrified, ashamed, convinced that survival meant silence. I want to tell her that speaking up won't destroy her life, it will save it. I want to tell her that the adults who matter will believe her, support her, help her heal. But mostly, I want to tell her that pretending to be okay isn't strength, it's a prison. And while the truth might be terrifying initially, it's also the only path to freedom. The question isn't when pretending to be okay becomes too hard to hide. The question is when you become brave enough to stop hiding. For me, that moment came when someone who loved me refused to accept my lies. When I realized that being truly seen, broken and scared and imperfect, was better than being invisible and safe. I stopped pretending to be okay because I finally understood the difference between surviving and living, and I chose to live.